been sharing this with me to say, BA, we are in trouble. Yeah, Miriam, sometimes I guess we probably are. Very funny golden shoe going your way there for that. Lousy, stinking Gators, they've got reason to curse, and it gets even worse for them 79 days from right now. That is our Gator Hater Countdown, and we'll see all of you back here tomorrow. DawgNation Daily, presented by Meriwether and Tharp. We'll look forward to talking to you then. And on video, time now for our R.S. Andrews Cool Down. R.S. Andrews, the one you turn to for your air conditioning, heating, plumbing, and electric needs. They show up on time. They do the work that's promised for the price that's promised. Okay, so we got knocked off of YouTube, so there you go. All right, so let me go to DawgNation.com. Hopefully they're still able to be with us, and we'll get some comments there from them. We'll do some Facebook stuff. And, y'all, I'm sorry. That's all I can say is I'm just very, very sorry. Very, very sorry. I'm really kind of at a loss for words. It has proven to be a formidable foe. We've dealt with our share of adversity this year for sure and on a number of fronts, and this is just, I guess, the latest example of that. So we'll try to keep a happy face, and we'll see where it goes. Scott Harris had issues on YouTube. Sorry about that. Let me talk about something much happier. Senior Dog 54 brings us up. Emerson Hancock, former Georgia pitcher, made his major league debut last night for the Seattle Mariners. That is good news. He said he started for the Mariners, got 5 innings, 2 hits. He also made a great play in the field, too. 1 run, was the winning pitcher against the Padres, 6-1. I just love that. I mean, talk about I like major league debuts, period. It's always a really fun thing to see when a guy makes his debut in the big leagues, because most of us at one point in time dreamed about being a big league ball player. Like, not everybody now, it seems like, still likes baseball. But, I mean, I love the sport, but not everybody now seems to still like it. But when we were kids, everybody liked it, right? And everybody at one point in time dreamed of putting on the Major League Baseball uniform. At least everybody I know seemed to. And so when you see a guy like Emerson who actually gets a chance to kind of fulfill that dream and actually step out there and start a game, I mean, can you imagine how nerve-wracking that must be? Just amazing. Just absolutely amazing. So thrilling for him. Glad to be able to see that. And listen, you're reminded of this, and I will truly take this to my grave. Of all the injustices of 2020, and there were a lot of them, and it's amazing. We haven't quite given it the full reckoning it probably deserves, but different topic for a different day. Of all the injustices of 2020, perhaps from a sporting sense, there were no greater injustices than the fact that Georgia baseball team got taken off the field in a year in which you had Wilcox and you had Cole Wilcox and Hancock, the kind of pitching that could have definitely taken Georgia very, very far. I will always be left to wonder what that 2020 Georgia baseball team could have done had they had a chance to play. A.J. Ferraro asking about his namesake, A.J. Harris, getting significant playing time this season. Says, we are deep at the position, but his film from high school is incredible. Yeah, I mean, I would say that right now, Harris would not be one of the young players who I think can kind of make an immediate impact. I don't know that I would have Harris there right away, just from the simple standpoint of there's a lot of depth in that situation. I'm always kind of bet on guys who've sort of been here for a minute. For instance, it seems like Dalen Everett may be in the best position to start, but one of the guys is it possible to kind of quietly earn some buzz? Because that would seem to be a contradictory statement. But quietly earning some buzz right now is Julian Humphrey. And for a while, I mean, let's just be candid. Sometimes we try to be as candid as we can. The entire time that Slim Singletary was here, you never heard one word about him. You didn't hear a word of praise, a word of criticism. You just didn't hear one word. He was former 5-star who was here, and it was just as quiet as it could be, just as quiet as a mouse. And, from that standpoint, for a moment, it sort of seemed like Humphrey was sort of in that same category there as well. And, lately, obviously, Singletary ended up going to Arkansas, and Humphrey sort of stuck around. And it seems like Julian Humphrey's making the most of his moment here right now. So he may be actually competing for some playing time here right now. And you'd put Nyland Green probably in that category, too, just because he's been here for a minute there, too. So if you think about cornerback and what they may be doing, I think that's what you're kind of looking at opposite a guy like Kamari Lassiter, who's obviously banged up right now, but you expect to be fully healthy and ready to play come September. Now, if an injury situation were to linger into the season, then who knows what happens after that. But if we assume that Kamari is going to occupy one cornerback spot and kind of have that on lock, then it's the other 3 guys I think most likely can be at the one cornerback spot. Speaking of freshmen who could play and things like that, I was talking the other day about guys like C.J. Allen or maybe Raylan Wilson sort of stepping in at the inside linebacker spot. The guy that I probably shortchanged in that conversation may have been Jalen Walker. That's another one of those sort of guy who's been here now for a year, maybe ready to do a little bit more, and just an example of also what we're talking about of, hey, I may be a young player. I may have just gotten here. I may be hungry for my moment, but the guy that's been here for that year, also has a chance to, to kind of make good with the experience that he has. Scott Harris says, I've accepted a new job. Downside, I can't enjoy DawgNation Daily quite as often. The good news is the job's in Athens, so I get to enjoy the dogs in the classic city more often. Well, Scott, we're so happy for you and your brand new job, and obviously we'll love having you here when you can be. And, of course, 99% of our audience does not watch or listen to the show live, so maybe you'll have a chance on your way home from work or something like that, tuning in and seeing what you miss. But obviously we'll miss having you as a part of our comment section while you're at work, but we're glad that you're taking such a great job. DT also pointing out that if you go out and have a big pitching performance against a very good San Diego offense, you've really done something. And I would say that is certainly true. All right, let me go over to Facebook here for a moment. We will see how they're doing. On Facebook, Perry Watkins mentioning injustice about the fact that Georgia played at Tuscaloosa in 2020. Now we'll go back there again in 2024. So, yeah, I guess there are a handful of sporting injustices out there. Let's see what else. Matt Rucavini, I saw this. So apparently, as he says, Notre Dame is dictating to the ACC, and the ACC's response is to basically do whatever they want to. Yeah, I guess kind of helping with some of these like conference expansion type deal things here. Like, I'm sorry, like that is one of the worst looks for the ACC of all, having terms dictated to it by a team that doesn't want to be in your league. Like man, I think you're right about that. That comes. I saw some of this, and that comes across as a little bit embarrassing to me. Let's see what else. David Faulkner says, anyone else think the Poets that wanted to get rid of the Pac-12 to get control of the Rose Bowl? It's kind of funny. Last year was probably the last of the traditional Rose Bowls anyway, right? This year it's a playoff game, and next year it's also so this year it's a national semifinal game. Next year it's set to become one of those quarterfinal games. They're talking about having the top four seeds advance to the quarterfinals, all of which will be kind of old school, sort of New Year's Six type bowls. So the Rose Bowl's tradition as the Pac-12 versus Big Ten champion, that actually ended last year anyway. So that's an example of one of those huge levels of change that's kind of always been. And yeah, I mean, obviously, you wonder kind of what the future of any of this stuff is moving forward. But it was really the presence of the Rose Bowl and its value that was a big part of, because the one thing that I don't think people have ever stopped to fully appreciate, for about 100 years, college football didn't really have much of a national championship to speak of at all. And post BCS, when it seemed like the world was moving towards a college football playoff and finally truly deciding this on the field, and I've actually liked the college football playoff era. I know it's not everybody's cup of tea, but I've actually enjoyed it. I believe the college football playoff has been superior to the BCS. I do. I think that's been the case. But the one thing I don't think has ever been properly appreciated is getting this sport, kind of everything we sort of think of as FBS level football, to agree to a playoff was not an easy thing to do. And the folks out west, the Pac-12, they had to be convinced to do this. And part of the reason why the Rose Bowl got so many concessions, you can always be on New Year's Day, you can always have, your time slot and things like that. Part of the reason why they got so many concessions was if they didn't get those concessions, then the people out west were content not to have a playoff. And I think that's important to note going forward. We've only got, this will be the 10th year of the playoff. We're only going to have a 10-year history of a college football playoff after this. So the idea that this is some sort of immovable bedrock part of the college football calendar that can never be impacted in the future, history would suggest that's not the case. We've only had it for a few years, and the people that joined in to allow it to take place, in some respects, had to be dragged kicking and screaming and had to have a lot of concessions made to them just to vote for it. So keep that in mind. The 12-team playoff that we're going to have in 2024 and 2025 is a 2-year agreement. For 2026 and beyond, we don't know what the postseason is going to look like, but it could look like anything because it has always been hard to get agreement on college football postseason. So just kind of keep that in mind. All right, I guess we have something up over on YouTube, so I'm going to go over there and pop over here and just sort of see what's happening. Let us see. Jerry Dog fan having some fun over here. Let's see what else. All right, let's see what else. Frank Patterson says that Zeus got the starting nod from the Raiders. You love to see that for Samir White. That's awesome to see. That is awesome to see. Let's see what else. Paul Moon says Dalen Everett was always pushing for playing time, but also hearing about Humphrey is awesome too. Yeah, I mean, I think that Everett could be potentially a very good player, and seems like Humphrey may at some point in time get his shot there as well. Paul Moon also on the subject of some of the online chatter that's out there. Like, first of all, I will never understand how some of these lame videos get so many views. I'm not talking about anybody that sort of exists in our space. I'm talking about some of these, like some of these, like, rando, I don't know. Like, YouTube is a very weird place sometimes, right? All I'm telling you is just don't believe everything you hear, I don't guess. Or I don't know. Do what you want to, I guess. I don't know. Let's see what else. DMart42 on some of those issues. Yeah, I mean, all I can tell you is I personally take this very, very seriously. Let's see what else. And if people are upset, I get why they are. I do. Yes, Skullfly mentioning that. I do get it. Like, listen, when criticism is warranted, I'm more than happy to take it. Now, there have also been some moments here the last couple of months when I was criticized for things I had nothing to do with. Like, I don't take quite as well to that but if criticism is warranted, I'm more than happy to take it. And in this particular case, we got to do better. So if you are on there saying that, then you better believe that's true. Jerry Dogfan also mentioned Colquitt County against Dutch Fork out of South Carolina. That's a great game. You get a lot more of that now than you used to. These, I guess, interstate battles, cross-sectional battles between, and, Creekside, a team that I'm going to broadcast next week, they're doing a couple of these. Most importantly, they're going out to California to take on Mater Dei. Like, I love these great teams from Georgia. I'm more than happy to go out of state, or in some cases, welcome teams from out of state to play them. That's a really fun thing here right now. A very fun thing here right now. Jay Shipe says, does the ACC grant of rights agreement remind you of a 30-year loan in a Cadillac? That's actually a pretty good comparison right there. That's a pretty good comparison. And it's also one of those things of, I mean, the contract was written the way that it was as a way of trying to hold the league together because for a lot of those teams, that's their best shot, right? And so ultimately that's, if you're Florida State or a Clemson, somebody like that, your biggest issue might be the fact that so few of those teams in that league have anywhere else to go, because ultimately I believe what the Florida States of the world really want to do is cast so much doubt on the ACC that a majority of ACC teams leave. That causes the entire league to disband, and therefore there's no one to pay the buyout to. I believe that's ultimately what they're probably trying to achieve. I'm not that smart, so don't take that as the gospel, but I believe that's the strategy that's in play, unspoken, which is, hey, if enough teams decide they want to go somewhere else, then the ACC just sort of dissolves, and there's no one to pay the buyout to. But the majority of that league needs the ACC to sort of stay in business, and so therefore they're not likely to ever go anywhere. DMart42 says, do you think the SEC goes shopping? They'll be more interested in historic rivalries like Florida State, Miami, or brand power alone like Clemson. DMart, I still think it's option C. I know this seems weird, but the ACC teams the SEC would want the most, I believe, are North Carolina and Virginia. Now, that sounds crazy because neither one of those are football power. Certainly Virginia's not even close. But it does get the SEC into areas in which they're not currently located. And I know we're kind of, in one respect, sort of moving out of a cable bundle world. I realize that. But when you look at the big dollars like the Big Ten is commanding from its media rights deal, that's still sort of priced based on linear TV. Like it's linear, like traditional television that's driving the price up on that. So while we're kind of exiting a post-cable bundle world, the truth is I don't know that ESPN wants to accelerate that process. I don't. So, the idea of greater SEC presence in a relatively populous state like North Carolina and certainly a populous state like Virginia, I think there's some value there. And I think the problem with Florida State and Clemson is it gives you deeper saturation in an area in which you kind of already dominate. Florida Panhandle, state of South Carolina, that's pretty red-hot SEC country as it is. You can't populate that all that much. Maybe Miami more so because, that's a bigger city, whatever else. But still, I think the SEC's greatest desire from the ACC menu would be states that's not currently located. And that's also one of the things that kind of concerns me is like, people have criticized me for saying that I'm fearful of Greg Sankey being outmaneuvered, but this is an example of that. Florida State, Clemson clearly have value, but they may not have value to the SEC, but they would have value to the Big Ten. And that's where you got to be careful. Big Ten goes and gets the best of the Midwest, best of the Far West, and then also comes down south for not the best, that's the SEC, but sort of second-tier best. Florida State and Clemson are formidable programs. All of a sudden now they really do have a national league. And you just got to be careful with that. I think you got to be careful with that. Like, unfortunately, Florida State, Clemson have value, but I don't know monetarily they have a ton of value to the SEC because I don't believe they bring more money into the league. Now, I also wasn't sure the Big Ten would go out and get Oregon and Washington, and they did. So maybe there's a chance that the SEC ends up taking on these ACC schools, even though I sort of have some suspicions that they will. But I am fairly confident, I am quite confident, that the SEC's number one wish list from the ACC would be the University of North Carolina, and I have a sneaking suspicion that Virginia might be its number two, as strange as that is. Jonathan Aaron says, I'm sorry I'm older now, but if I was 18, had a few $1 million in NIL, you couldn't tell me anything. I'd be young and dumb. I wouldn't have wanted to work hard. Since I'm older, I would now. Yeah, I mean, I get where you're kind of coming from on that. And honestly, if you can get millions of dollars guaranteed as a young person, you probably should take it. You really probably should. If it's a few $100,000, you probably need to think about your long-term situation. But if it's millions, who cares about, I mean, I'm being, casual when I say this, but who cares about your future to a certain extent if you can get that kind of money in the present, I should say. All right, let me go back around. We'll get ready to get off here. Scott Harris said if the regional SEC wins the national title every year over a national conference, it would be a bad look. It certainly would, and that's the one thing we all keep in mind here is that no matter how the maneuverings take place with the financial folks, the SEC is likely to always have the better overall teams, the better overall players for sure. But the Big Ten, the nuclear option here is if they became national enough, they could just agree to kind of have their own postseason and generate the kind of revenue they could from that and say, listen, we're not going to play you at all. We're not going to play any game that's not on Fox, CBS, or NBC, the television networks they're a part of. We already see teams refusing to play other teams. Texas and Texas A&M for a good number of years have refused to play each other. Oklahoma and Oklahoma State moving forward, at least one side of that Oklahoma is going to refuse to play that game. The idea of so-and-so team would refuse to play another, that happens in college football fairly frequently. So the notion that a league could also refuse to play another league given the way in which TV dominates everything, that's quite possible. So this is a fatalistic opinion, so just keep this in mind. But my fear is that the SEC in the future might have the best teams and no way to prove that they're the best, because the kinds of teams they could be to sort of prove their national supremacy, there's just a possibility they might not get a chance to play them. I would say that's at least a possibility. I also think, and this is a very weird take, that if you gave me 200 to 1 odds, I'd be willing to make a small bet that sometime in the future we actually go back to 4 or 5 conferences organized mostly around geography. I think there's a chance that one day the pendulum might swing back into a little bit more of a normal direction. And the reason why I think that is because a lot of things in life that we sort of think are here forever, trend-wise, actually kind of fizzle out pretty quick. Like I'll tell you, post-pandemic, we heard, oh my gosh, no one's ever going back to work again. Everyone's going to work at home forever. Well, if you drive on 400 in the mornings right now, you realize that the rush hour traffic is as bad now as it was prior to, March of 2020. People are going back to work again. Now, there's some commercial real estate that is sitting empty, but that's a different topic. That trend of, people are working from home forever and they're never going to change their mind. Well, we see now that trend is kind of fizzled out here a little bit. There are other examples of that when you think, this is here and it's here to stay. And oftentimes the world kind of reverts back to the way that it was. Keep in mind this when it comes to college athletics. There are a lot of these programs that have a ton of debt, big time. Cal has massive debt. When Florida State's talking about taking on private equity money, that's a fancy way of saying a loan, which is a slightly fancy way of saying debt. And at some point in time, the prospect of spending big to make big in college athletics, that kind of works as an idea as long as you're of the belief that the money that rolls in via media rights deals is always going to go up. But there's a couple of very real scenarios where, hey, maybe one day that spigot kind of, is it spigot? Is that what that's called? Faucet, spigot, whatever you want to call it, kind of runs dry here a little bit. It's not a guarantee that ESPN's going to always be around to pay these types of things. Their subscriber number right now is about 73 million. How fast is that number going to continue to go down? And as they try to make the transition to a la carte offering, is their ability to kind of spend big on rights fees going to be what it once was? And there's always the hope that a big time, because remember, like the digital players have a lot more money to throw around. Like I think the market cap for CBS is about $33 billion. The market cap for Apple, I believe, is nearly $300 billion. So they've got a lot more money they could be throwing around. But Apple has also said they only want kind of rights fee type things, sports properties that they can sell globally. And college football, as much as we love, it's not really a global product. Messi soccer could potentially be global. Apple's involved in MLS. They like the idea of global offerings. College football will never really be that, at least for the most part. So if we get into a world in which like the digital streamers are the big spenders on sports, that may hurt college football a little bit, because college football, kind of operates in a little bit different type of way. So just keep that in mind. Rambo says, hey, just have the NCAA step in and straighten all this out. Yeah. Don't hold your breath there on that. DT says the national media would shame the Big Ten into playing the SEC. I'm reminded of, do y'all know what the show Succession is on HBO? Have you ever watched it before? One of the characters on Succession was talking, like somebody was like saying, if you do that, you guys are going to get embarrassed. And she's talking about her family, said, we don't get embarrassed. See, when the dollars are big enough, the Big Ten's response might be, and listen, I'm not saying this is going to happen. I'm saying it's a thing that could happen. The Big Ten's response would be, hey, we don't get embarrassed. We don't feel shame. If they feel like they can make more dollars by holding their own postseason, because they essentially operate as a league, a little bit like a professional sports league with teams in, every time zone, then, the shame that would come their way because they're running from competition, my guess is, like a lot of rich folks who feel like they can make more money, they would just sort of shrug off that shame on their way to doing that. All right, final comments. Back on Facebook real quick. Barry Watkins says, Feinbaum says he thinks the NCAA football could separate from the rest of the NCAA sports. That's certainly a strong possibility, I'd say. And the idea of this even being governed by the NCAA, I think that's an idea that could go away there too. We already see lots of, a lot of sports operate different than like the football conferences anyway. Like, isn't Notre Dame in the Big Ten for hockey, for instance? We see a lot of things already in sports where teams are organized slightly different depending on the sport that they're in. So in the future, football being something separate than the rest of the sports, that could be true. But y'all, once again, this is where I have to remind you, is that probably won't be good for the other sports. That if football becomes its separate deal, why would they then give the money to something they're not even involved with anymore? And if you love college baseball, which I do, if you like college basketball, which, a lot of us do, if you care about women's sports, some of us do, when it comes to some of that kind of stuff, the idea of, the simple solution here is we'll just break off football, we'll make it something separate, and then we'll put the other sports all together. Well, if you break off football, you make it something separate, you make the players that play it employees of the conferences or something like that, then at that point in time, I think you've likely ended the notion that football would fund the other sports on the basis of some sort of Title IX obligation or something like that. So we are kind of in a golden age for college sports. College sports have never been more viewed on television than they are right now. And I think there's a very strong possibility that golden age does not last if you kind of reconfigure all this. And listen, I'm not saying I'm super pessimistic about the future, but I do believe that people need to be fully aware of the consequences for all the change they could see taking place. And if you do like sports other than football, breaking off football and making its own thing is not likely to be good for the sport that you like. For me, that'd be baseball. For some of you, that might be women's basketball, whatever else. Whatever thing you like, a break off of football would probably not be very good for that, because most of these sports, no matter what the propaganda people tell you, most of these sports cannot fund themselves. And I know you hear about, oh my gosh, the NIL interest in so-and-so player is through the roof. I'm not saying that's not real, but it's not real enough these sports can fund themselves. It's just not. And so, do with that what you will. Let's get ready to go. All right, we got to go for now. All right, sorry about the issues. I guess, I don't know. I don't know what to say about that, but I want to give you full acknowledgement on that. So y'all check out RS Andrews online, rsandrews.com, for your air conditioning, heating, plumbing, and electric needs. Showing up on time, doing the work that's promised, the price is promised. You can trust them on that. They get your air conditioning unit tuned back up to factory fresh specs. Find them online, rsandrews.com. We'll see you back here tomorrow. DawgNation Daily, presented by Merriweather and Tharp.